The diner sat on the edge of the highway like it had been forgotten by time, its neon sign flickering between open and nothing at all, the windows smeared with years of grease and rain. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee and fried onions clung to the air, heavy and familiar. Hannah moved between the booths with practiced efficiency, balancing plates with one arm, her posture straight despite the ache that settled into her shoulder by the end of every shift. She had learned long ago that confidence was armor, that if she moved fast enough, smiled politely enough, most people would see the uniform before they saw what was missing. Most people. Tonight, 4 men in tailored suits occupied a corner booth like they owned the place. Their laughter cut through the low hum of the diner, louder than the clink of cutlery, sharper than the hiss of the grill. They watched Hannah the way hunters watched wounded prey, eyes lingering, mouths curling into grins that promised cruelty. When she set down their drinks, one of them leaned back and whistled, his voice dripping with mock admiration. He asked loudly how she managed to carry so much with so little, and the table erupted in laughter. Hannah froze for half a second, then forced her hands to keep moving. She had heard worse. She always did. She told herself it was just noise, that words couldn't touch her if she didn't let them. But the sound followed her, clung to her like grease. In a booth near the window sat a man alone, jacket draped over the seat beside him, hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. Jason Statham had been there before the suits arrived. He liked places like this because no one asked questions and no one expected conversation. He noticed details without trying, the way the waitress compensated with her body weight, the faint tremor in her fingers when the men laughed again, the way the cook avoided looking up. Jason didn't move. He didn't glare. He simply watched. The men escalated, each joke pushing further, testing how far they could go before someone stopped them. They called Hannah names disguised as humor, suggested she was lucky to have a job at all, laughed about tipping her in spare change because she probably couldn't count it properly. A trucker at the counter shifted uncomfortably, then looked back down at his plate. Another customer paid quickly and left. Silence became a participant, thick and complicit. Hannah returned to the kitchen, took a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, and came back out with their food. Her face was calm, professional, but her eyes avoided theirs. Jason noticed that too. He remembered other rooms, other moments when cruelty had worn a different uniform, when laughter had masked fear. He had learned patience in places where impatience got you killed. He finished his coffee slowly as the men continued, their confidence growing with every second no one challenged them. The leader, a man with slicked-back hair and a gold watch that caught the light, leaned forward and asked Hannah if she needed help cutting their steak. He mimed the motion with exaggerated care, his friends howling. Something shifted then, not in the room, but in Jason. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. He stood, pushing the booth seat back without sound, and walked toward their table. The men looked up, surprised, annoyance flashing across their faces at the interruption. Jason's voice was calm, almost conversational. He told them she was doing her job and suggested they try doing theirs. The leader laughed, looked Jason up and down, and asked if he was her bodyguard. Jason didn't smile. He didn't threaten. He simply met the man's eyes and repeated himself, slower this time. The laughter died down, replaced by mutters. The leader stood abruptly and shoved Jason in the chest, a show meant for the audience. Jason responded with a single punch, precise and devastating. The sound was dull, final. The man collapsed back into the booth, unconscious before he hit the seat. The room went silent in a way it hadn't before. Jason looked at the remaining 3 men and told them to sit down. They did. He turned, returned to his booth, and picked up his jacket. Hannah stood frozen near the counter, heart pounding, unsure whether to thank him or apologize. Jason didn't look back. He finished his bill, left cash on the table, and walked out into the night, aware that humiliation like that never stayed contained. He knew they would follow, and he was ready. The night outside felt heavier than it had moments before, as if the air itself sensed what was about to happen. Jason walked away from the diner without looking back, his pace unhurried, each step deliberate. He had learned long ago that fear fed on hesitation, and he refused to give it either. The neon glow faded behind him as he turned into a side street where the sound of traffic thinned and shadows stretched longer across the cracked asphalt. He knew they were coming. Men like that always did. Humiliation burned hotter than pain, and their laughter inside the diner had already curdled into something darker. Footsteps echoed behind him now, uneven and aggressive, accompanied by muttered curses and the sharp rasp of anger struggling to sound brave. Jason turned into a narrow alley, the kind of place people avoided instinctively, walls stained with old rain and forgotten posters peeling away like dead skin. The alley smelled of damp concrete and rust. He stopped halfway down, allowing the darkness to swallow him, and turned to face them. The four men emerged from the mouth of the alley like predators who believed they still held the advantage. The leader's face was flushed, his jaw already swelling where Jason's punch had landed. Rage twisted his features, making him reckless. He accused Jason of embarrassing him, of making him look weak in front of everyone. His words spilled over each other, threats mixed with insults, bravado cracking under the weight of wounded pride. Jason listened without interruption, his expression calm, almost bored. When the leader finally paused to breathe, Jason spoke quietly, telling them that what they did inside the diner said everything about who they were. He called them cowards who mistook cruelty for strength. The words landed harder than fists. The leader roared and charged, swinging wildly. Jason stepped forward instead of back, collapsing the distance and driving his elbow into the man's jaw with devastating precision. The sound echoed off the brick walls, sharp and final. The leader collapsed, hitting the ground in a tangle of limbs. The second attacker rushed in from the side, trying to grab Jason's coat, hoping numbers would make the difference. Jason twisted his wrist with a controlled motion, locking the joint until bone protested. The man screamed and dropped, clutching his arm. The third attacker swung a bottle, glass catching what little light filtered into the alley. Jason ducked, swept his legs out from under him, and followed with a calculated strike to the chest that knocked the air from his lungs. The man collapsed, gasping, panic replacing aggression. The fourth hesitated, fear finally breaking through the illusion of control. He tried to step back, but Jason was already moving, closing the gap with ruthless efficiency. One short, brutal blow ended the fight before it could begin. Silence flooded the alley, broken only by groans and ragged breathing. Jason crouched beside the leader, lifting his head just enough to make sure he understood. He told him to remember the waitress's name, to remember her face, and to remember this pain every time he felt the urge to humiliate someone else. The leader nodded weakly, eyes glassy with fear and shock. Jason released him and stood, straightening his jacket as if nothing remarkable had happened. He walked away without a backward glance, leaving the men scattered in the darkness, their sense of superiority shattered beyond repair. Morning arrived slowly, sunlight spilling through the diner windows and revealing the worn textures of the place in unforgiving detail. The smell of fresh coffee replaced the stale air of the night before, but the memory lingered. Hannah arrived for her shift with a knot in her stomach, half expecting the men to be there again, half afraid they wouldn't be, and that the quiet victory would feel unreal. They never came. Hours passed, then days. The booth where they had sat remained empty, like a scar that refused to fade. Customers treated Hannah differently now, not with pity, but with acknowledgement. Some offered quiet words of kindness, others simply met her eyes and smiled. It wasn't dramatic, but it mattered. She felt seen in a way she hadn't before, and that changed how she moved through the space. She worked with the same professionalism, but with a steadier heart. The story spread beyond the diner, reshaped by retelling, turning Jason into a near mythical figure. Some said he was an ex-soldier, others a drifter with a violent past. Hannah knew better. She remembered the calm in his voice, the lack of ego in his actions. He hadn't stayed to be thanked, he hadn't needed applause. He had simply done what he believed was right and disappeared. The men in suits avoided the area altogether, their confidence permanently cracked. The diner itself seemed to breathe easier, the oppressive silence replaced by something warmer. Jason moved on, as he always did, carrying nothing but the certainty that one moment of intervention could ripple outward in ways unseen. The message lingered long after he was gone. Cruelty thrives on silence, but it collapses when confronted. And sometimes justice arrives quietly, speaks briefly, and leaves before anyone can ask its name.